Welcome back to the Civilnet podcast. I'm joined today by repeat guest and friend of the show, political analyst Eric Hacopian. Eric, thanks again for hopping on.
It's a pleasure.
Now we're now in your home turf here. We're going to analyze the U.S. political arena and the results of the U.S. presidential elections with Mr. Donald Trump. What kind of culture does it take to elect a man as you know, love him or hate him, but as deeply flawed as Mr. Trump? What happened there?
I think it's what you're really looking at is a complete failure and a repudiation of the political establishment in the United States. In fact, of both parties. This is on some level, Vice President Harris was actually supported by leading figures in both parties.
Established Republicans like Liz Cheney and so on.
Yeah. So what you had is you had a complete repudiation. Yeah. And essentially a majority of the country, or near majority of the country, giving the middle finger to the political establishment, who they see as having failed them, and a country where living standards have fallen over the last few years, and actually historically for many longer years, depending on which income level you are at, and in a country whose borders were seen out of control, and culture wars that people didn't need. So I think this was a broad repudiation, but I think that's the analysis of it, because Donald Trump comes out of a place. There's a reason why people would turn to someone like him, but ultimately I think it's the sort of the American politics is becoming a third world politics, in which it's the reality of it is based on the failures or the betrayals of the establishment, or even of one generation or the next. If you see how young people, how pessimistic young people are in the United States, and how they acted out by either not engaging or voting for someone who would have been completely unacceptable 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting, is exactly as you said it, right? He's completely unacceptable 10 years ago, and now he won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. They won the Senate. It's unclear if they won the House, but it looks like they will.
Yes.
I mean, it's a thrashing. Mm-hmm. It's a complete massacre. Mm-hmm. Now on to what I care about. How do you see this changing? I mean, Armenia has aspirations, and they've reiterated these aspirations recently to reach the level of security partnership with the United States. It's like one layer under ally at this point. How would you see a pivot in Armenia's in the relations between the United States and Armenia?
It's really hard to say. As I've said before, I don't think there was ever anything instinctively, even in the 2016, in his first term, there's nothing instinctively anti-Armenian. I think there were obviously some problematic relationships with the other side, which were business relationships.
Well, he's personal friends with Erdogan, right?
Yeah, there's elements of that, but at the same time, Armenia is a much firmer place with some parts of his political base, especially the Christian right, and so it's too hard to tell. I mean, in reality, most people who were focused on Armenia wanted the opposite result, because it was more certainty. I think with Mr. Trump is more uncertainty, because you really don't know what he's distracted with, and how much focus he's actually going to pay to foreign policy in general, much less. I think his agenda is going to be far more internal. But some of these relationships that are established are institutional in nature, and institutions stay when the president comes and goes. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think it necessarily needs to be entirely bad.
Yeah, I also think, like, if you look at a lot of the Armenian reaction across the board, there's kind of this doomsday. We always have this doomsday reflex, but credit to where it's due. I mean, Armenia has seemed to have learned since the 90s. We didn't just throw our eggs in one basket and switch from one overlord to another. We have great relations with the French. We're expanding with other European powers, with Greece and Cyprus. So it's not like we're hung out to dry, right? I think it's important to put that into context. But the United States is still the only global superpower at this point. Mm-hmm. Given Erdogan's personal relationship with Trump, I mean, these are unsubstantiated rumors, but the idea was that when Biden agreed to sending the F-16s to Erdogan after a lot of back and forth, part of that stipulation, among other things within Europe with the refugees and working with the Greeks and so on, part of that was that they would play a more constructive role in the Caucasus. Do you see these fail-safes going away at this point?
It's hard to know. There's no way to know. I suspect not. Because even the Erdogan-Trump relationship was problematic at some points. He essentially put sanctions and crashed the Turkish currency. So I think it is wrong for people who overanalyze Trump's actions or behaviors, because he does not operate like a traditional political actor, and he can wildly swing on things that can be favorable to you or things that can be unfavorable to you. So it's not. It's very hard to put an absolute measure on that.
Well, the big issue that everyone's worried about, right, is Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and Trump has made it very clear, and actually more specifically his vice president, J.D. Vance,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's kind of surrounded by a lot of non-interventionists.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose the big fear over here, right, is that with a Russia that's less occupied in Ukraine, they can turn their attention back to us. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the prospects of that happening?
There's some. I think there's been tremendous, because even in his own political party, there's tremendous, on many levels, a lot of support for Ukraine, actually more so than not. So this is not a guaranteed that they're going to cut off all aid to Ukraine and Russia wins and all that. At the end of the day, I don't think he wants to be the president that on whose watch the Russians score a major victory in Europe. So it's hard to say. It's very easy to generalize. That's more of a wait and see. But I think they have an instinct towards ending this war, because I think they see Russia as not the primary adversary in the world, but China as the primary adversary in the world instinctively. So it's very hard to say what it actually means. Whatever it is, I suspect there'll be a downgrade of the absolute 100% support that we see now. I think at some point their instinct would be to end this war, but it takes two to tango. I'm not sure to what extent Mr. Putin will be willing to meet him halfway to actually end up doing that. I think that's their base instinct. That does not mean it will necessarily translate to policy based on circumstances as they move forward.
Trump's whole emphasis on America first, right? It also comes with a little bit of criticism towards NATO, and considering that Armenia is working to expand cooperation with NATO actively. So what do you suggest Armenia does to reorient its foreign policy?
I mean, listen, this is just politics. So you have a country that has changed directions. If it's America first, then you need to make your country fit in the context of America first, not to say, well, these people are stupid and you can't work with them and he's an idiot. That's not how you approach things. If he says America first, okay, well, we spent billions of dollars buying weapons from the Indians and the French and other people. If you want America first, that money should go to the United States, right? So sell us weapons. So there's countless ways to look at it. Politics is endlessly variable, and in every risk there's an opportunity. And even in this case, this is not the outcome that I would have wanted on Monday, but this is the reality that we're dealing with. So you just have to try to maximize, to tell your story in a way that matches theirs and maximize your gains. It's not more or less than that.
Well, you mentioned that Trump has almost a singular focus on China as the great boogeyman. How do you see Armenia reorienting its messaging and relations in regards to China?
Well, I mean, listen. Immediately after Armenia signed, became a strategic partner of the United States. Yeah. About 2 weeks after that, Ilham Aliyev did the same thing with China. Yeah. He handed us a fantastic gift. At a time where you have the president of the United States that is obsessed with marginalizing China or sees China as the primary adversary of the United States, our main enemies just go off and sign a strategic partnership with them out of spite, for the most part. So those are the kinds of things. You have to look at the niches where you can actually make this relationship work. And there's a lot of support in Trump's religious right base for Armenia. Many of these people have been worked the last couple of years. They've been here. They've made statements. And there's all kinds of people on the Republican side that were supportive of Armenia that were quite skeptical. So I think there's a lot for us to work with.
Well, the other big thing is that Trump is a very he's a very obvious hawk when it comes to Iran. And the alternative to this China middle corridor, on which Baku is a major port, by the way, is the trade route that goes from India through Iran, through us, and then onward to Georgia and Europe. What do you see, like how can we maintain this balancing act between Iran, India, and the US, where there's obvious cooperation and there's also obvious disagreements?
I think you have to, if you look at the rhetoric of the both the vice president elect and the president about Iran, it's contradictory. They are ultra hawks in being anti-Iran, while at the same time they've made clear that they do not want war with Iran, that does not serve U.S. interests. So it's a contradictory thing. I think what they're likely to do is to, whatever limited guardrails were on Israel, is to lift all of them. That's far more dangerous than what the United States will itself do, because they are, they clearly ran as the anti-war party. They clearly ran as the party that we don't want your kids to die in desert wars. Yeah. So I think that those 2 points will be contradictory, and I think his base instinct would be to let the Israelis do what they want, short of dragging the United States into a war. But that just because you want that, it doesn't mean it. An out of control Israel could very easily drag the United States into a war. So I think it's contradictory. They're clearly hawks on being anti-Iranian. He's the one who blew up the nuclear deal, which was utter stupidity. But at the same time, his base instinct was not to start big wars, because that conflicts with his narrative and his internal agenda.
And finally, Eric, what do you think Armenia should look out for in the first 100 days of this new presidency?
I don't think anybody outside of the United States has anything to look out for the first 100 days, because I think in the first 100 days he's going to be focused on deportations and closing the border, and that will override anything that happens internationally.
Well, you can already see Macron stepping up. He's always wanted to be the leader of Europe, and Macron has, let's say, he's got a soft spot for us. So I don't know if it'll be as dire as everybody says things are going to be. We just might get more French attention after all.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, it's the reality is that Europe's security over time is going to become more of Europe's responsibility, no matter who's the U.S. president, because that's where things are going. And reality is, Europe actually has all the resources necessary to do that. They just haven't been willing to do it because the United States wanted to take that role. So Europe, that is the EU, is the largest economy in the world. This notion that they are not capable of defending themselves against the Russia that is having difficulty fighting a country that is 1/7 its size for 3 years, it's a bit farcical.
Thanks again for joining us, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks again for watching Civilnet.